Are you, sir?
Well, I watched online last week. Thank you very much. Good job.
I wasn't here. Oh, yeah,
I
right.
don't envy all of their mothers doing, including having to wash the uniforms. And of course,
She's going very simple.
Very good. Retired.
well,
19th. It's kind of weird.
well, yesterday, we've all been auditioning. Because at first, they, like, Wilder was, of course, the best. And then pretty soon, like, one by one, the boys
I know what I do. It's different.
I mean, I think.
Well, so I looked online, it looks like different,
I think we'll go ahead and get started.
different weekends where they collect the quilt.
And
Yeah,
as
and there was some
promised,
things
want to sort of wrap up a little bit of what we have been doing in the last month or so, namely the focus on the parables of Jesus. As you already know, and I emphasize, there were most scholars believe somewhere along the line of 40, maybe 41, depending how one counts it, parables of Jesus. And we spent the month of September, and we got through 3 parables of Jesus. So if we were to do 40, we'd be sitting here next spring in April thinking about it, but we won't be doing that. But we do want to finish up and say a few words about the last one that was printed out for us. That is the parable on the tenants. And here is why. Over the years, as a way of sort of background, over the years, when I was teaching full time, and I'm saddened that I don't get to teach these days anymore. It's one of the, I guess. When we began talking about particularly Hebrew text, which was my area, I would remind students that in reading the biblical text, it is not my role to make it relevant. I begin with the presupposition that the text is relevant. The text is relevant. Now, it's a hard sell when you're reading Leviticus and you say to me, Hemchand, remind me why this is relevant. But it is relevant. It might not necessarily strike you as something that you want to curl up and read every day, but it's there. It's part of the biblical text. And it's there. And sometimes it's hard. And what some folks do, I don't think any of us wants to do this, even though the temptation is there, is to pluck a verse out of here, and a verse out of here, and a verse out of here, and then we have this sort of kind of collection of verses to make a case, right? But of course, in so doing, it's again as if someone says, I want to describe someone, but the only parts that you emphasize would be their hair and their nose and their toes, okay? And you leave the rest of the body to your imagination. That's not how we read the text. There are difficult things in the Bible, some of which we simply do not want to talk about. Period. But it's there. And some of which in the months ahead we are going to be talking about. Okay? But for today, let's talk a little bit about the parable of the wicked tenants. And as I said last time, one of the metaphors that Jesus uses quite a bit and picks up on the Old Testament, and we'll go through that text in a second, has to do with the vineyard. But that was kind of a metaphor that made sense in his day, right? And we can today hear about a vineyard, and because we don't go to a vineyard, or even more so, we don't own a vineyard, we can walk away and say, well, you know, thankfully, Jesus was talking about the vineyards, and we don't have a vineyard, therefore it doesn't apply to us. Of course, that misses the point. People knew about the vineyard. I wish I had a vineyard. Wouldn't make any money in it because, you know, the wine thing. So Jesus began to speak in parables. A man planted a vineyard, put a fence around it, dug, and I want for us, and by the way, as you already know, so this will not come as a surprise, I love to work with language, and as much as possible, it's not always possible, but as much as possible to go back and essentially say, okay, I know what the English says, but what exactly does the Hebrew or the Greek, or a little bit later, the Latin says? Because we have these early translations, right? And I want to remind us, even though we already know this, that we do not have any original text. If someone has an original text that they're willing to sell to you, hold on to your wallet and walk away. It doesn't exist. What we have are copies of copies of copies that have emendations and additions and changes. That's just a fact. So as much as possible, it's always helpful to go back and say, well, what was the Hebrew that was used here? And as I was thinking about this in preparation, here is the background of the word in Latin for tenant. Okay? A tenant is someone who holds and keeps and maybe grasps, which is a very firm word, literally and metaphorically speaking. You hang on to this. So this is not maybe what in contemporary times we think about tenants, even though there is an overlapping there. I want to propose to us that it is really about something that has been entrusted to us. Again, it is striking that one of the words that is used to sort of understand tenant here is the word keep. And you and I maybe are from a generation, some of us are younger than others, but we are from these generations where if I said to you, Janet, would you mind keeping this for me? Right? I'm asking you to hold on to this, to protect this, right? So keeping is not just taking something and tossing it. It is protecting it. And we know that the word keep, which in Hebrew, shamar, simply means, and we see it in the Psalm 121, the Lord will keep you. When it says that, this is not an aside. The Lord will protect you and care for you. And in that psalm, it is striking that it is both in the past tense and it's in the present tense, and it says, and I will. It's in the future. So the idea of being a tenant is profound. Why is this important for us? I'd like to suggest that I think we should think about this very broadly. We have been given, entrusted the idea of this creation to keep. We are tenants. We are tenants to keep. And it will go on from generation to generation, as has been the case before us and will be the case after us. And so it is incumbent to ensure that how we keep this. And by the way, again, sort of the landlord, okay? those two words should not be mistaken, is God. And so what do we do with this which has been given to us? How do we care for this? And so here we have this, again, parable. But look at it. A man planted a vineyard, put a fence around it, dug it for the winepress, built a watchtower, then he leased it to tenants and went away. When the season came, he came to a slave to the tenants to collect from them his share of the produce of the vineyard. But they seized him and beat him and sent him away empty-handed. And again, he sent another slave to them. This one they beat over the head and insulted. Then he sent another. This one they killed, and so it was with many others. Some they beat, others they killed, but he still had one other, a beloved son. By the way, you can begin to sort of extrapolate and draw conclusions here. Okay? It's not too difficult of an incline to interpret here. Finally, he sent to them, saying, "They will respect my son." Okay? So the landowner says, "They will respect my son." What they have, by the way, look at up to this point. Keep in mind, up to this point, they have beaten, they have insulted, they have killed, and they have done so repeatedly. But the owner did not punish up to this point. Let me give you another opportunity. And I have a sense that if I send my beloved son, right, the respect will be there. Not only will they not dare to do this, but most assuredly, they will know that they shouldn't do this. So what will happen? Finally, he sent to them, saying, "They will respect my son." But those tenants said to one another, "This is the heir. Come, let us kill him, and the inheritance will be ours." So they seized him, killed him, and threw him out of the vineyard. What then will the owner of the vineyard do? By the way, if you are the owner of the vineyard, what's left for you to do?
Go yourself.
Kick them out? Go yourself? What are the chances, if you went yourself, that they will welcome you with open arms? He will come and he will destroy the tenants and give the vineyards to others. Have you not read the scripture? The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. This was the Lord's doing, and it is amazing in our eyes. Now, here is the way it ends. And I would like to submit to us, I'm including myself here, that this last verse matters profoundly. When they realized that he had told a parable against them, they wanted to arrest him. And what stopped them? The people stopped them. Okay? They wanted to do to him exactly what they had done to others. But it is the voice of the people. What, in Latin, we know this because it's sort of come down to us, not quite as popular as "keep the fires burning." But it has come down to us, literally, of course, the vox populi, the voice of the people. And because they feared the crowd, they let him go and went away. We don't want to collapse this parable, as we sometimes do, in drawing very sharp parallels. Well, let's see who the tenant is today. Think about this broadly. What does this mean for us? What does it mean to be entrusted with something to care for that will produce, that will be here for the next generation? Alan.
It makes you wonder, when Christ was crucified, God could have done something. He didn't.
Could have done a lot of things. And let me remind us, because sometimes some things are important enough to be reminded repeatedly, right? We know that. Sometimes some folks go overboard and it becomes ad nauseum, but some things have to be, we have to be reminded of certain things. You remember the words of Jesus on the cross, right? We know many of them. I thirst. It is, we know those words, right? Forgive them, Lord. They don't know what they're doing. Okay? But remember, there was also a question. My God, why have you forsaken me? And what's the answer? There is none. There is none. The question is left hanging out there. And we are reminded that sometimes we must ask the question and not be so anxious to rush for an answer. Answers will come. But sometimes we want it right there because everything is immediate, right? And you know how patient to people we are.
Very.
But to paraphrase the great German writer, Rainer Rilke, who wrote absolutely some magnificent pieces, all of which are in translation, he said, in writing to a young man, and this is an actual correspondence, you can find it in the bookstore if you're so inclined. It's a little book called Letters to a Young Poet. And the young man is asking him really large, important, existential questions. And Rilke says to him, famously, 3 words, 4 words, live the questions now. Live the questions now. Do not be afraid of hanging on to a question, for gradually the answer will emerge. But don't force an answer. Struggle with the question. But the question has to be asked, Alan. It comes right out of Psalm. By the way, Psalm 22, that's how it begins, right? So Jesus actually is quoting the opening of that psalm. My God, why have you forsaken me? And it's important, in part because Jesus is both divine and human. Yes, Jesus is, I know not us in this room here because we're enlightened, but there are folks who would like to strip away the humanity of Jesus and only focus on the divine. But if you do that, then the suffering of Christ becomes farcical. That he doesn't feel pain. Wink, wink. But actually it's not true. So the question is there. And the voice of the people. So in thinking about this, I thought, again, look, I put this up here because look at the systemic way, right? This is how we have been given this vineyard. We were not just told about creation, take it, go and you guys prepare it, do what you... No, it's been prepared for humanity. It's been dug, it's been cleared, it's been planted, it's been built. It's been hewed. We don't use that language anymore. And then, with all of these things, come an expectation. And then what do you do when that expectation? I don't know about you, so I'll speak only about us, my wife and I, and our family, and maybe very specifically. This, I sometimes say, that of all the things I would never, ever, ever, ever want to say to our children is the D word. I would not ever want to be in a moment where I have to say to our children, I'm disappointed in you. Divine disappointment? And it's not in the New Testament alone. God looked at what was happening in the time of Noah and says, this was a mistake. This was a mistake. Could you imagine? A divine mistake? I need to start over. And by the way, it's not as if Noah was some glorious, perfect human being. No. So there's divine disappointment. But I thought we would look again at this because I believe that Jesus is thinking and talking about something that is familiar, that comes out of the Old Testament, out of the Hebrew Scriptures. Okay. I'll remove its hedge, it will be devoured, it will be swallowed up. That's what the word means. It will be consumed. All right, so here we go. I believe that Jesus must have been alluding to what is known as the Song of the Vineyard from the prophet Isaiah. Okay? Now, let me give you a little bit of background to this. There were 4 prophets who functioned in the 8th century, 700 plus years before the time of Christ, the 8th century. And these are called classical prophets. There were prophets before them, but none of them really has a book named after them. So we don't have the book of Nathan, or we don't have the book of Elijah, or Elisha, or Micaiah ben Imlah. Not Micah, but Micaiah. Okay? We don't have those, but we have stories about them. But these prophets are often called the classical or the writing prophets. And these are the earliest that we have. And they set the standard in many respects for social justice. If you read these prophets and you walk away, and I said to you, what do you think is one of the central themes in this, and you said, I'm not sure that I saw a central theme. I will send you back to read them again. Because again and again and again, they speak about justice and what it means. You cannot miss it. You simply cannot miss it. And throughout the Hebrew Bible, throughout the Old Testament, even the word for justice and righteousness, it's used over 1,000 times. You cannot navigate through the Old Testament without running into that word. So, this is a parable in the 8th century by the first section of the prophet Isaiah. Now, Isaiah has, I'm going to put you to the test here. How many chapters? It doesn't really matter, does it? In the scheme of things. But there are 66, in case you're keeping track. Okay? But it's actually divided into 2 books. Okay? Even though we have it as one large 66-chapter book. But it's really 2 books. The first part ends at chapter 39. I'll tell you why this is important. It ends at chapter 39, and this is the part that belongs really to the 8th century. And this is the part that we often refer to in scholarship as Isaiah or Isaiah of Jerusalem, or first Isaiah. Okay, stay with me here. The second part likely came easily about 150 years later. And chapter 40 begins with those famous, very famous words that everyone in this room knows. even though some of us may not know that we know. But we do know. And I'm confident that you know. And I know that you know, even though you may not think you know. And it begins, of course, with the Messiah. Comfort, comfort my people. Remember that magnificent tenor piece from Handel's Messiah? Comfort, comfort my people. And of course, it's comfort, comfort my people because the people are coming out of exile. And they have spent decades and decades in the Babylonian exile, and now they're coming out of exile, and you're being told, comfort my people, please comfort my people. They have suffered beyond what they should have suffered. That's the second half of the prophet Isaiah. The first half is from the 8th century, and he has counterparts in Amos, in Hosea, and in Micah. This comes from the first part. And this is the way it reads. The Song of the Vineyard. I will sing for my beloved. The Hebrew there, it sounds like the language that we love. It's a beautiful word, isn't it? But the Hebrew is much more for my friend, is what it is. Right. I will sing for my beloved my love song concerning his vineyard. And if I were translating this, and if I were asked to translate this, and because I'm using the word if, you should draw the conclusion that I was not asked, okay? And probably with good reason. It would be something like this. I will sing for my friend or my beloved my love song concerning, my translation would be a song about love. That's really more accurate. When we say love song, you know, it has a different kind of overtone. But I want to sing a song about love. And in that song, I will tell you all of the qualities that constitute that love. And that's what this is about. A song about a vineyard. My beloved had a vineyard on a very fertile hill. He dug it. See if these words resonate again. He dug it and cleared it of stones, planted it with choice vines. He built a watchtower in the midst of it and hewed out a wine vat in it. He expected it to yield grapes, but it yielded rotten grapes. In other words, the vine dresser, the owner of the vineyard, did absolutely everything that should have been done to create a vineyard that would produce. Everything. Everything. I planted what kind of vines? Choice. And then what happened? Instead of producing grapes, it produced what? Rotten grapes. Some of the earlier translations said it produced wild grapes. It's not wild. Okay? That's a different, that has to do with species. This is rotten. How could I have done everything for this? And what do I get in return? Is rotten stuff. And I can't have that, can I? I can't. Therefore, what am I going to do? Now inhabitants, by the way, this is kind of like, this is almost a court scene, just for a moment is happening here. And I am speaking now. I am the prophet speaking on behalf of the Lord. I'm telling you what God has done. And you are kind of a jury. I have just presented to you what God has done to create this vineyard. And I'm going to ask you a question right now. And the question is, now, inhabitants of Jerusalem, people of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard. What was there for me to do for my vineyard that I had not done in it? Did I miss something? You're the jury. Was there something that I should have done, that I could have done, that I didn't do?
Didn't mention water in the line.
Didn't mention water. And that's possible, right? But I have to tell you, first of all, that was a rhetorical question. But I have to tell you that I would have to believe that it is likely to be almost impossible that God would not have watered. So why? Did it produce grapes? Yes. Grapes came. It's just that they're rotten grapes, right? It's rotten. So, by the way, you notice in the text here, we're not waiting for, your jury to come and say, well, we have been spending some time talking to ourselves, and the foreman says, actually, no, we know what the answer is. I did everything. So, here it goes. I will tell you what I will do to my vineyard. I will remove its hedge. It shall be devoured. Let me go back here. Okay? That's what it means. It will be devoured. I will break down its wall, and it shall be trampled down. I will make it a wasteland, and it shall not be pruned or hoed. It shall be overgrown with briars and thorns. And I will command the clouds that they rain no rain upon it. Which meant when it was being watered. But now I'm going to stop that. For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel. The people of Judah are his cherished garden. He expected justice, but found bloodshed, righteousness, but heard a cry. By the way, this is a devastating indictment. Everything is going to be torn up. Because when we're talking about the vineyard and the tenants, and we go back to this, we realize that this is an investment. And sometimes, even we think of that, I mean, let me pause. You think of the word investment, and what comes to mind? Money, right? And let me invite us to take a deep breath and forget about money for a second. The word means to do what? Literally, to dress oneself, to cover oneself. The stuff that Pastor Dave wears, or Jeff, they're vestments. It's what we cover ourselves with, to wrap yourselves into. I invited us to be invested into this, and you chose to produce rotten stuff. And I will not accept rotten stuff. No, not when the investment is about all the things that are choice. And therefore, it's devastating because there's no warning here, by the way. Here, I'm just going to destroy this. Because here are the expectations, and I have this up here to point out something, and I will stand at the back here. Because it says, God looked for justice, but found bloodshed. God looked for righteousness, but found outcry. Okay? It says here, God looked for justice, but found bloodshed, righteousness, but heard a cry. This is not, I just want to sort of explain this for a second. It says, God looked for righteousness, but heard a cry. Take a deep breath. This is not about hearing a cry. This is about witnessing what is happening in the society, in the community, in the world. And this is, it's a beautiful play on words here. You don't have to know Hebrew to understand the play on words here. If you look at justice, the word in Hebrew for justice is pronounced mishpat. The word for bloodshed in Hebrew is pronounced mispach. It's very, very close in pronunciation. Even some of the letters are the same, but they are worlds apart. Justice and bloodshed are worlds apart, even though the words sound very similar. The poetic parallelism here. I looked for mishpat but found mispach. I looked for tzedakah. That's a word that is a little bit more common, right? You also see it in Arabic, by the way. It's the same for Muslims and the Arabic word. I looked for tzedakah but found what? Se'ekah. And if you look, I don't think this has a, does this have a pointer? It doesn't have a pointer. But if you look at the Hebrew letters, you will see that there's only one single of the 4 letters, only one is different. And so it's the poetic parallelism is there. Now, what does it mean? I heard a cry, or my translation up there, I found an outcry. What does that mean? Let me toss this out to you. You don't have to, here's the good news about a group such as ours. You don't have to write a paper. There are no exams. We have religious language over here, thanks be to God. By the way, I love this, our society. When all else fails, we use religious language. Thanks be to God. Okay. Or like Doris does, if we don't have an answer, we have a coughing thing. You know. Here's the thing. What does it mean? What's the outcry? I mean, and we could focus on that one word and place it in the form of a question and said, in our society, in the here and now, in October, what, the 5th? In October 5th, 2025, in the here and now, in this society, in this world in which we live, what's the outcry? Protest. Suffering. But you notice, by the way, these are not wrong answers. But, you know, we have to say, what does that mean? Because we will start getting very specific. We can certainly say there is oppression. But what does that mean? How is that expressed? Life is not fair. And if Socrates were teaching here, he would say, but then Jesus did not die for fairness. But there is grace, and there is redemption, and there is the radicality of not allowing people to be pushed to the margins and outside of the circle. It's all there. It's in the text. It's uncomfortable, but it's in the text. So God looked for justice and righteousness, but found bloodshed and an outcry in society. And one of the things that we find in these prophets is that rarely do you find the very specific sort of, let me explain what outcry is. It's left there. But then we have a little bit of a hint. And the very next verse says, woe to those of you who join house to house, field to field, until there is room for no one, and you are left to live alone in the midst of the land. For those of you who accumulate and accumulate and accumulate and take from others and accumulate. And in case you missed it, you keep accumulating until the ones from whom you have accumulated is left to dwell alone in the midst of the land. So if we want to have a sense of what bloodshed and outcry might be, we can begin to see it in the language of that which is, whether it's a policy or an action that dismantles, that pushes aside. And so I'm going to, again, ask you to go back into your memory bank here to recall something that we talked about a couple weeks ago. And you may recall that in Genesis, there is a moment when something, for the first time in the entire Bible, there is something that God has pronounced not good. Remember? What is it that was?
The man was alone.
Aloneness is the first time. The very creation that God had put together, God looked at creation, remember? God said it was good, it was good, it was evening, it was morning, it was good, it was good. And then God looked at this magnificent creation and said it was what? Very good. That is, it was truly good. Literally, the word means. And then God, I'm thinking now in a kind of an anthropomorphic way, God steps back and looks again at creation and says what? You know, I've been looking at this. It's not good that this man should be alone. And then comes the whole sequence of finding, remember, a suitable partner. Aloneness. And according to this, to accumulate, to take, and to sort of build and build and build and take and build until those from whom you have taken is left to dwell alone. I'll draw one other quick parallel here, just to put things in context. You remember the Sodom and Gomorrah story? I mean, it's well known, right? And it has collapsed in society in a way that the focus has been, if not exclusively, overwhelmingly, the focus has been, well, the Sodom and Gomorrah story, the people were destroyed because of I'm hearing voices, and I don't like that, particularly from
I said lust.
lust,
Separated themselves from God.
separated themselves from God.